to the 80-20 Baseball Podcast. Strike! The 80-20 Coaching Masterclass, our weekly get-together where coaches go from new to good and good to great. Mastering the fundamentals and the art of coaching.
Welcome 80-20 baseball listeners. Great to have all of you here for our weekly get-together. Hope your week is going great. Hope your summer is off to a great start. I'm sure it is. And speaking of great starts, let's get this podcast started so we can have ourselves a great episode. The 80-20 Baseball Podcast is specifically for youth baseball coaches, but almost all of this stuff would work at any level of baseball. We take an advanced approach to more effectively coaching youth baseball. If you're looking for the same old coaching pointers, this is not going to be your podcast. If you're looking for something that's just going to affirm conventional wisdom in coaching or blindly promote all the new school stuff, the new school coaching methods in the baseball world, this is not your podcast. We get great by asking tough questions, by questioning everything, using first principles, and we master the fundamentals before we start getting cute with all this other stuff. This podcast is a lot of work to put together. I do all the scripting, I do all the recording, I edit it, I publish it, and I'm not going to waste my time duplicating other podcasts that are out there, or even somewhat duplicating other podcasts. Why? That's a waste of time. And my goal is to prioritize my time, my family's time, your time, all of our time as much as possible. That's why I value the 80-20 principle. And speaking of the 80-20 principle, I have an interview scheduled to be recorded tomorrow with somebody that I meet with every Friday. Him and a group of guys. We get together early in the morning, a men's group, and we try to become better people. So I talked to Scott about doing an interview for this podcast after talking to him about youth sports coaching, which is right in his wheelhouse. So he's a consultant for businesses, vice presidents, owners of companies, and you'll hear more about that on the interview. But he himself has 4 kids that have gone through the youth sports world. He played college volleyball at UCLA, won multiple national titles. And we're connected through one of the most well-known baseball scouts in the Southern California area. So I'm really excited for that interview, which is scheduled to be recorded tomorrow. And so the plan is for Scott to break down, using the 80-20 principle, his top 10 youth coaching tips and share those with all of us. And he's a guy who gets it. He's been in the trenches with his own kids, other teams, at all the levels, and he's a great communicator. So I'm excited to be bringing that to all of you in the next few weeks. Last week, we discussed an option that we could use or go to if the other team is playing dirty. And in youth baseball, it's more likely that the opposing coach or coaching staff or parents are uber aggressive and are making it a hostile environment, something that kids shouldn't be around, frankly. Adult issues coming to a head out on a baseball field in front of a bunch of kids. So we talked about the option just to pull the team off. Hopefully this never happens and it's a last resort. And I want to be very clear, just because your team's getting boat raced by 40 runs doesn't mean you pull them off the field. Just because the opposing pitcher strikes all of our hitters out doesn't mean we pull our team off the field. In fact, those are awesome learning opportunities for our kids. Remember, youth sports at the end of the day is supposed to be a mostly enjoyable environment that kids can use to better prepare themselves for life and that we can use to better coach up our kids to have a really great life. But I'm seeing a lot more of this. Coaches, teams, usually coaches, opposing coaches cross the line, and they create an environment that's too much for kids. So if you didn't hear last week's discussion, go back, listen to that. Speaking of a coach getting a little fired up, I have a quick current event segment here. I like current events to tie them into how we can be better coaches using examples that are very recent. In this case, just a few days ago, this happened at the College World Series. Kevin Schnall, the Coastal Carolina baseball coach, I'm sure some of you saw this, was ejected in the first inning of a College World Series game. It ended up being the last game of the College World Series, which LSU won. On a side note, we have talked about the hitting approach that LSU uses. 3 years ago, we had an episode. We talked about their hitting approach, and we tied it into the hitting approach we've had on this podcast it's been on the 80/20 baseball website for 6 or 7 years. And it works, and LSU's hitting approach is top notch, and they had some tremendous arms. But now back to Coach Schnall. I'm a big fan of Coach Schnall, big fan. We talked recently on this podcast about how he spoke up for his grounds crew, for those folks in and around his program that got treated like dirt by a well-known, high-level opposing coach. And he spoke up for them, and he went to bat for them. I really like where he's coming from, and I really like what he's doing with his program. I would copy him as a youth baseball coach more so than the other coaches you typically see on TV, etc., because he's winning with strategies, methods, a process that can be used at any level. He's not just relying on the uber talented players. So now he got ejected and he was arguing ball strike calls. He came out after what he thought was a bad call on a pitch that was up and in to the right-handed hitter, and the umpire called it a strike. Was it a bad call? I thought so. There wasn't that vertical rectangle strike zone on the screen, but if you pause the pitch as it crossed through the area of the plate, it looked to be inside and up a little bit. So was it a bad call? Well, it was the call. Was it favorable for Coastal Carolina? No, it definitely favored LSU on that call. Now, I've said that I'm a big fan of Coach Schnall. I've also acknowledged that I agreed it was a bad call, at least the last one that got him out of the dugout. So I'm siding with him on both of these things. Here's the thing. It has always been a rule, written or unwritten, that you do not argue balls and strikes. And you typically will get a warning, but that's if you say something from the dugout. Or if you start to come out of the dugout, you quickly turn back around after you get that warning. But that's it. It's what I call an auto ejection. It's an automatic ejection if you argue balls and strikes. That's at any level. That has always been the case in baseball. Every coach knows this. So what can we learn from this? One, goes back to the process that I highly recommend all coaches utilize when they perceive a call to be bad. Ask yourself, is this something that can be changed? Can this call be changed? Can it be reversed? If not, almost always you should just move to the next pitch. Like the well-known mental game book, So What, Next Pitch. Now, for all of you that think the umpire was quick on the trigger, should he have had thicker skin? That is fully subjective. I would say yes, in my opinion. My opinion is the umpire should have thicker skin on that, but that's fully subjective. What I mean is that's my opinion. That's your opinion. That's our opinion. The facts are the facts. Some umpires have thin skin, and if you call them out in front of everybody, especially with your hands up in the air, holding up the number 3, telling them they missed 3 calls, you yell to them, or at least loud enough that they can hear you from 30 or 40 feet away, to tell them that they've missed 3 calls and they are ball strike calls, it's typically not going to end well. So the facts are the facts. It's an auto ejection in baseball if you argue balls and strikes. The facts are some umpires have thin skin. Your next game, you may have an umpire with thin skin. So we could definitely sit here and talk about, should umpires have thick skin or thicker skin, or should this umpire have had thicker skin? But all we can provide in this case is an opinion. I would say yes, he needs thicker skin. How I would have handled this as an umpire is I would have called timeout. I would have walked over to the coach. I would have got closer to the coach. I would have kept my cool. I would have heard him out and tell him, I'm working hard back here. I'm trying my best. I can see how you thought those calls weren't great. I hear you. Here's the deal. I can't have you coming out yelling at me from 30, 40 feet away. You can't argue balls and strikes. Hey, this is your warning. The next time you argue the balls or strikes, I'm going to have to eject you, okay? Are we clear on that? I don't want to, Coach Schnall. I like you, but I'm going to have to. Now, that's how I would have handled it. If I was the umpire, I would have walked over to the coach, try to diffuse it a little, let him know you understand where he's coming from, then drop the hammer, the warning, and I think that would have been the best way. But that's my opinion. The facts are some umpires have thin skin, and they're not going to follow that process. Coach Schnall gets ejected, and he would not have been ejected if he would have followed cardinal rule number 1. Don't yell at the umpires from any distance. Don't yell at the umpires, and definitely don't yell at them from any distance. You calmly walk toward them with no body language. As you get to them, you turn slightly toward the field away from all the spectators, and then you can give him a piece of your mind as long as you attack the call, not him. Cardinal rule number 1, Do not put an umpire in a situation where he feels he needs to save face. What's the worst thing a coach can do? Show them up, call them out in front of everybody, question them out loud. Whether people can actually hear what you're saying or not, the perception is people can see this, they can see your hands up in the air. He didn't follow cardinal rule number 1. Don't give the perception that you're showing the umpire up. I sat in an Uber a couple years back on the way to the airport, got to talking to the driver. He's been an umpire for over 30 years at the youth, high school, and college level. I said, what's the number one thing coaches shouldn't do? He said, show them up. So it's interesting because Coach Schnall seems like a very level-headed coach. But even the best of coaches get caught up in the emotions, in that emotional state. Totally normal. If you feel like you're a coach that has emotional volatility, I highly recommend you go for a 20-minute jog. Some of you can jog faster than me. Some of you jog probably my speed, not that fast, but go for a 20-minute jog of any speed right before you hop in the car and go to the field and get yourself a decent night's sleep. Get your 7 hours, your 8 hours, maybe your 9 hours if you've been working a hard, long week. I feel like if you do those two things, you'll be like 95% less likely to overheat and get over emotional in the game. You'll keep a calm head. You'll keep a cool head. So we can give the umpire a piece of our mind, but just do it so only he hears it without any extra body language. Walk up calmly and slowly, talk in a calm manner, turn away from the spectators. And then if you need to lay into him a little bit, telling him his call is terrible or his calls are terrible, that's cool. And you're going to get away with a lot more if you do it that way. You could even go so far as to do all those steps. And then as you get to him, you say, hey, I know umpiring's not easy, but those 3 calls were really bad. And I think it's really pushing the favor of the game towards the other team. I really feel like your calls are not keeping this game on an even playing field, which is all we want. There's 3 types of coaches. There's coaches that don't ever come out and talk to the umpire about anything. There are the coaches that blow a gasket and yell and scream about everything. And then there are the coaches that go out calmly with a cool head, following the steps that I've talked about here. They turn their body so they're not right up in their face. They kind of turn almost shoulder to shoulder with the umpire, and then they lay into him a little bit, right? Not with a loud tone, but just basically saying, hey, those calls are terrible. Like, you missed 3 calls. That's really bad. That pitch is clearly inside. That pitch was at the hitter's feet when it crossed the plate. That's terrible. That's not the strike zone. Like, you could get into him a little bit, but go after the call, not the umpire. And it's all about body language and tone and body positioning. All right. Huge fan of Coach Schnall. Got ejected. I was watching it with my wife. He gets ejected. She goes, what happened? I go, he argued balls and strikes, and he showed up the umpire. Now, we can argue back and forth about the umpire needing thicker skin, or he should have counted to 5 after he gave the warning, or what have you. But those are opinions. And the facts are, if you argue balls and strikes, you're automatically on super thin ice, and that's always been the case. And Coach Schnall knew that. And if you come out of the dugout with your hands up, holding up the number 3, and telling him from 40 feet away, 30 feet away that he's missed 3 calls, and you do it twice, he doubled down and said it twice, it did not surprise me one bit. I was actually shocked on X, all the people that were surprised that he got ejected. Now, you might not have been a fan of him getting ejected. I totally get that. I wasn't a fan of it. I wouldn't have ejected him for that if I was the umpire. I told you how I would have handled it if I was the umpire, but I wasn't surprised one bit. So we can learn from that. If you didn't see it, you can go watch the highlights of that to see exactly what I'm talking about. Now, last week I talked about sharing some tips of how to deal with a star player or star players that are mistreating lesser talented players. We're going to get into that next week. I have 2 things I want to talk about this week that I really want to cover. Terms and conditions. Every business, every service, they have terms and conditions. As coaches, it's highly recommended that we have a basic template for terms and conditions to provide to our parents before the season. These aren't team rules. These aren't team standards or expectations like on the field, during games, practices. These are terms and conditions. I would change the wording on this to expectations, or if you want to even soften that up more, pick another synonym. And the goal here is to have full transparency with the parents, ideally before the season starts, or at the latest, as soon as something starts to come up and there's some issues. I think it's important to have a brief terms and conditions, expectations for parents. Clarity, transparency, be upfront. Perfect example of this is if you have a question about anything or a concern about anything that's outside of an immediate injury or a player's well-being, that needs to be held, not just till after the game, but until the next day. Some coaches have a 24-hour policy on this. The problem is if your game is later in the day and then you have another game the next day, that doesn't give the parent time to voice their concern. So that would be my expectation for any concern or anything that they want to bring up. Again, the caveat here is if there's a player's well-being, especially immediate well-being, safety at stake, then that needs to be addressed immediately. That could be a parent walking into the dugout if they think there's an injury or a physical well-being issue. As coaches, we can't tell parents to not step up and be advocates for their players in that case. There should be no time restrictions on that, of course. Everything else, like what position they're playing, what spot in the batting lineup they're hitting, how much they're playing, were they the starting pitcher or not, the expectation is that they will wait until the next day to communicate that to you. Another big one is parents that are not coaches are not permitted to coach the players during the games. They can't coach them up on their pitching delivery, their swing, how they play first base, outfield. We need to be upfront with this. And then ideally give the why. A confused player is going to struggle more. When they're trying to work on what we're coaching them on, what they're hearing from the bleachers, that's not good. I would even go as far as to say, let's work side by side, hand in hand, to coach up your kid. It's foolish as coaches to not listen to a player's parents about what they think might help them as a pitcher or a hitter, an infielder, a base runner, etc. But the expectation is we can work together on this, but we're going to have one message to the kid about whatever it is. We're not going to coach them up two different ways on the same thing. And we're not going to yell at them or coach them during the game. So those are two examples of having terms and conditions for the parents. Now, I've talked about team rules. The coaching plan, the 80-20 baseball coaching plan has team rules. You can call them team standards or whatever. It has a guide for that. It has them outlined. Those are for the players, for practice and games. But I think there's something that should be given in writing, emailed ideally, because then you have a timestamp receipt, and it should outline a few of these key items. What I recommend is you request that each parent reply to it saying they've read it and they're okay with it, or if they have any questions or concerns, to send those. Now, what can you do if they break these terms and conditions? This is tough, but at least you're proactive. And then when you go to discuss these issues, if they come up, at least then you have something to stand on. It's a tough area because you don't want to penalize the kid for their parent. You don't want to kick them off the team. There's not a lot of leverage, and that's why it's important to get as much leverage proactively as possible. And that's why I think having this terms and conditions type of idea. I wouldn't call it terms and conditions, but I use that because I think all of us know when we buy a product or sign up for something, there's terms and conditions. When you sign up for a gym membership, there are terms and conditions. And I think that we can all relate to that idea of terms and conditions. I would go with expectations, team parent expectations, or even a team parent guide if you want to soften it up a little. I wouldn't have more than 3 to 4 of these expectations or bulleted out points, essentially, but that should plant the seed in your mind. Yeah, I want this because these issues come up so much. This happens a lot. This happens way more than the other coach or the other team playing dirty. Having these things happen within a team between the parents and the coach and all the players, this happens a lot more often. And just a quick email that bullet points out 2, 3, 4 things that are not going to be acceptable with the concise reason behind it, the why behind it, and kindly ask for a reply that they've understand that and they're good with that. And at least it gives you something as a coach to stand on when you have to address these things. All right, now a bonus for this week. I got an email recently from a coach, parent that says, "Hey, Coach Bo, what do you think about these weighted balls? My kid's 13 years old. I see all these baseball players, pitchers using weighted balls to throw harder, or at least attempting to throw harder through this type of training. I used weighted balls with pitchers when they first started coming out, way back, way before Driveline even started using them, and they're well known for it. I went to USC for a 4-day training with the National Pitching Association well over a decade ago, and weighted ball stuff was talked about then. So I'm very well versed. I've coached professional players with these, high school players with these. I made a mistake. I put too much time in at the high school level with weighted balls. There's just not enough time at the lower levels. Now, not having enough time to prioritize this is the least of my issues with weighted balls at the youth level. Weighted balls, in my opinion, or weighted training balls, plyo balls, are beneficial for older and stronger and polished pitchers. Believe it or not, just because you're older and stronger doesn't mean you're polished. If your kinetic chain is not sequenced up right, you're not using your lower half, there are a lot of pitchers, even at the major league level, I'd say I would not throw a weighted ball with that pitcher until they dial in their lower half and they get their sequencing right, because they're already putting a lot of stress on their shoulder, on their elbow, unnecessary stress because they have an inefficient delivery. So there's a very well-known adage in the strength and conditioning world that goes along the lines of Adding weight and resistance to poor technique is a recipe for injury. Never add more weight or resistance to poor technique. And when you're doing something at a fast speed like pitching, which happens super fast, how fast that arm and shoulder moves, that just increases that problem even more. And again, this is one of the main reasons this idea, not weighted balls, but this idea of trying to use what they use at the more advanced levels with full-grown players that have nothing but time to train, using those methods and strategies and tactics and techniques with younger kids. That's where I saw the biggest difference. And I wanted to be that kind of conduit between understanding the advanced coaching methods out there, but also trying to make sure that the message to youth coaches and youth players is vetted out and coming from a much more optimized place for the youth level. So before you start trying to even throw harder as a pitcher or a player, you need to optimize your throwing technique, your leg strength. There's so many of these pitchers that I see that have weak foundations that use these weighted balls, plyo balls. It's not good. Now, I'm not saying in and of themselves they're going to cause injuries, but when they're done with a bad foundation, when they are prioritized over other things, it's a bad recipe, it's bad sequencing. I equate it to something like this. Would you take a kid that's in coach pitch and have him go hit against a college pitcher? You'd be like, no way. Yeah, because he's in coach pitch. He just got out of T-ball. Next, he's going to hit off the machine. He's going to hit off some live pitching, 40 miles an hour. He's going to build up. And eventually, yeah, he's going to be able to hit 90-mile-an-hour fastballs, if not faster. There is so much risk with weighted ball training, plyo ball training, throwing heavy balls. There's so much risk for youth athletes. And for any pitcher or thrower that's not physically prepared, not just physically prepared, their technique is optimized, their delivery, their mechanics, their throwing mechanics, adding resistance or weight to a movement that's not optimized, not a good idea. If anything, do some long toss. Get the leg shuffle going fast, get the long toss going, get their lower half more involved. And at the end of the day, nobody cares how hard pitchers throw ball four. Nobody cares what the radar gun reading said. If it's ball four, all right, always a good time. Hope you have a great rest of your week. I look forward to bringing that interview to you either next week or the following week. And we'll also talk about 4 ways to stop our star players or all-star players from mistreating those lesser talented players. So hope you all have a great rest of your week. Take care. And until next time, let's take care of our health so we can be at our best for our family, our close friends, our teams, our players. Let's take this information. Let's go put it into play. Y'all take care. Until next week, adios.
This has been the 80-20 Baseball Podcast, the 80-20 Baseball Masterclass. We got this. Now, let's take the field.